Hello, Eric. How are you?
Good. I'm so sorry I'm late. I was actually on the Google Meet. That was also on the invite.
Oh, got it. No
I called
worries.
the bottom.
Welcome to Investigating Pathways. I'm your host, Arnav Garg. On today's episode, I'm joined by Eric Bahn, previously the founder of Beat the GMAT, the most widely used test prep network across the US. Eric is now a co-founder and general partner at Hustle Fund. Today, we talk through Eric's journey as a founder in VC, problems with toxic VC culture, and how the pandemic has affected the way people are making money, as well as what advice Eric has for teenagers and young folks just starting on their entrepreneurial journey. Let's get into it.
Well, how would you like to begin? I'll let you drive this.
Absolutely. So, could you just describe what you were like as a kid and in general, just your life, growing up?
Sure. So I grew up in Michigan on the west side of Detroit in a town called Bloomfield Hills. It's like sort of like the Palo Alto of, of Detroit. Really nice area. And I would say that I can hardly recognize that child
Mm-hmm.
from when I was growing up to Michigan to what I get to do now. I think after a lot of rumination about what that experience was like, so there are definitely a lot of kind and good people here in the Midwest, but I never felt like I belonged there. Relatively few underrepresented groups there. Asians are definitely not are considered a minority in the Midwest as
Okay.
well. Not so much here in the Bay Area. And even from an early age, I knew I wanted to get out of there. But it really did affect, I think, my own mental health as well as my own confidence. Was really afraid to speak up for a long time.
Yeah.
Just felt like this is just not a place. I just felt like an alien in that environment. And then things got substantially better when I came out here to California about 20 years ago to attend college. And I think that's really where I really found myself, and got down this path and falling in love with technology, my friends, my wife. Everything sort of came together after that.
Wow, it's really cool. So, do you feel like it definitely fits in a lot more here for you? Like everything sort of clicked when you came to the Bay Area as opposed to Detroit?
More so,
Okay.
the experience of being a minority in the United States is definitely institutionally inhibiting
Yeah.
when it comes to just like where do I actually belong? Even just like this week, I saw a tweet by a congressperson who made a really insensitive comment that like Priscilla Chan, who's Mark Zuckerberg's wife, is Chinese. Like that's all she says. Like Priscilla Chan is Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is like she was born in Massachusetts. She's American,
Yeah.
right? But it's in your face in certain places more so than others when people view you as not American as default, right? In the Bay Area,
Absolutely.
it's a lot better. Like I haven't heard as much racism or at least directed to me personally, which is actually one of the privileges of being maybe East Asian in the Bay Area. It's not to say that's fair for other groups that live here, but it's the food is certainly better than where I grew up. No offense to
Yep.
Michigan food. And at least for the family that I'm raising here, I do think that they're going to have my kids are going to have a really different experience of feeling more included, and hopefully can gain a lot of confidence in their childhood and propel that into cool things in the future for their adult lives.
Absolutely. So, you mentioned your college experience is why you ended up coming to the Bay Area, right? And you went to Stanford, am I right?
That's right.
Yeah. So, what did you major in at Stanford? What was your college experience like?
Yeah. So I was a political science major, and then I did a master's in sociology. So nothing that feels directly relevant to the work that I did initially, but I actually do find a lot more relevance. I can sort of talk about that later on. I'd say that like my biggest takeaway from college is I met my wife on the very first day of college. So that was pretty amazing. And then I met all of my best friends. Right. In terms
Uh-huh.
of if you were to question me on like, what did you actually learn though? Like, tell me about this class. I have no recollection about any of that stuff. So, one of the things that I realized ended up becoming okay as an adult. So I'm now 39. It's been like 15 years since I graduated. Is there's an obsession about just like having a major that's marketable while you're in college, and that can
Yeah.
mean things like computer science or whatever kinds of professions that you're chasing. But what I found in my career was just that, probably did have some minor impact in the beginning, but the longer that you go into your career and the more that you sort of like graduate into leadership positions, we all do the same thing, which is just selling, right? And good
Yeah.
storytelling. So convincing, your engineers to drop what they're doing to follow this path, or it could be actual selling, like trying to get a client to convince you of something. Those kinds of, we all kind of like maybe start from different places of the mountain, but at the end of the day in leadership, it's really around like selling a vision and great storytelling. And that's where I start to find a little bit more relevance of where my degree came in handy
Yeah.
in the last few years, because I did a lot of reading and a lot of writing in college, and I find that it makes my ability to read and write that much more easy, I guess, as an adult in
Okay.
this field of work that I'm in.
Yeah. Awesome. So I know during your master's degrees when you sort of started Beat the GMAT, right? Which you
Yeah.
worked on for a while. So why did you decide to become an entrepreneur and take that risk during college?
I don't think I ever wanted to be a founder, yet I've been a founder for most of my career now. So, what I would have guessed when I went to college from day one was I'd be like a lawyer or possibly like a journalist. Never really thought I had a risk-taking bone in my body. But then I realized that entrepreneurship is more about when you're so obsessed about solving a problem the right way in your view, and you just can't let it go. That's what I think really distinguishes great founders, regardless of background. It's
Yeah.
just like, I really want to understand this problem and how to solve it perfectly. So in my case, I had a pretty unremarkable college experience. So I went to a great school, but I was a pretty mediocre student. I spent a lot of time playing video games, smoking weed. And then, I never did, because I was very privileged, any like summer internships or work. So I didn't do anything really. Picked somewhat easy majors at the time. I thought they're easy, at least. And so by the time I was getting ready to consider the next step after college, I realized, oh my gosh, like I don't really have that much marketable experience right now. Like, how am I going to get a job?
Yeah.
And I remember like talking to my mom right towards the end of college, and she was like, look, you're too dumb to, this is in her like broken Korean English, like you're too dumb to become a lawyer or a doctor. So maybe you should consider business school. Right.
Okay.
And no knock on business school people. They're plenty smart folks out there. So I was like, all right, that sounds reasonable. And I was able to actually apply to like a master's program. There's like a way to do that fairly easily at Stanford. That's a
Hmm.
fairly high acceptance to buy a little bit of time. But in the process of doing that, I wanted to prepare for business school as like a potential next step in either immediately or in the subsequent future. So I started by preparing for the GMAT test, which is like the SAT entrance exam for colleges for business schools. And I didn't have any money, so I decided I'm just going to go buy a couple books and then study it myself. And if I could say that there's only one natural born gift I possess, it's actually the most worthless gift. It's the ability to prepare for and succeed on standardized exams. I'd say that I'm really, really good about that. And
Okay.
so what I thought was like, okay, I'm going to take these books, but to stay accountable, I'm going to create this blog called Beat the GMAT, which at the time my girlfriend who became my wife and like a few other friends, I just wanted them to read to stay accountable. And I would sort of just summarize like what I studied for the day, lessons learned. And it turned out that Beat the GMAT became a really popular website in like the MBA applicant world as a self-study resource. And that cascaded later on after being a part-time project for 3.5 years into a full-time project that ultimately was 9 years that we
Yeah.
pivoted many times and then sold to the Daily Mail Group, which is a large media business in London in 2012. So deeply enriching, wonderful experience as a founder, and really just anchored me in allowing me to do a lot of other things later on in my career.
Wow. So really almost an accidental entrepreneur.
Yeah, I think like that's not too unusual a path.
Hmm.
Those who just sort of stumbled into a problem that it's like a bug in their ear. They just can't get it out. They need to do something about it. And um, yeah, I mean, like it was never an intentional thing at all. And I thought maybe like a fun little side hobby, but then it just continued to generate more and more and more revenue. Um, yeah, those are kind of like how I got my start into becoming a founder.
Wow. Okay. Awesome. So now let's briefly jump over to your first job out of college, which I've read was Intuit, right?
Yeah.
And so I saw on your LinkedIn actually that you've written during one of your rotations at Intuit, you were responsible for helping transform upset customers into happy net promoters for the company, right? And you really loved that job, is what I've read. So could you tell me a little bit about what made that job so special?
So I was fortunately able to find a job after my master's program because my really good close friend, Eddie, whom we're still really close with over 20 years, he was working there a year ahead of me and was able to convince the hiring manager to talk to me.
Yeah.
So after BSing my way into that job, I was in this rotational leadership program. It was called the RDP program, Rotational Development Program. So really interesting concept. It was modeled after what happens at like Johnson and Johnson and General Electric, some of these large conglomerates, where you take these young graduates and put them into these rotation between 3 and 6 months long in different functional areas of the company. So there is, marketing, product management, corporate strategy. I did design, but everyone starts off in the same rotation when you join the program, which is customer support. So at the time, they would fly all of these graduates from fancy degrees and schools, put them into to Tucson, Arizona at the call center there to field questions from angry customers who need technical support help on their QuickBooks software, right? And I think this ended up becoming one of the most important jobs I've ever had. And in fact, it's something that I think about almost every day because of a few things. One is it was deeply humbling because, you have colleagues who are on this floor of thousands of people. It's like a gigantic warehouse in the middle of Arizona who come from all walks of life. Some of them were ex-cons. Some of them have like addiction issues. Most of them didn't go to college, and so forth. And you are immediately humbled by how much better they are at this job than you are because they possess like wickedly sharp EQ, and street smarts and being able to just like talk to people. So the biggest lesson that I learned though out of it was just like, yeah, exactly what you set up in terms of the prompt of that question, which is how do you turn someone who's super angry to you into someone who is very happy with you? And a lot of these lessons I've learned have allowed me to navigate lots of hostile situations. I'll sort of give you like the two key takeaways here of this lesson, just in case you don't want to go to Tucson to do this job at some point or enough. So, although I recommend you do. So, the first lesson is if you want to disarm someone who's coming at you with a really angry argument, you need to immediately agree with them. So if you like come to me saying like, wow, this QuickBooks software is total crap. Like I spent all this money and it's not even working. Like I'm so frustrated. You respond by saying like, oh man, like I am really sad and disappointed and angry as well that like you put all this hard earned money and like it's just not working for your needs. Right. When you agree with someone and just like recognizing, where they're coming from, there's no rebuttal. You can't get more angry at someone agreeing with you, right? So that's part one. And then the part two is actually safety. So then after that, once we kind of get through that, I'll say something like, look, I know this is ridiculous. You're so busy, but I commit to actually staying on this call with you until we get your problem solved. All right. So I got your back. All right.
Yep.
And then that's when it begins to shift. You start working through the problem. And then by the end of it, if you solve the problem, generally it's a really good experience on the phone. All right. So yeah, I mean, this is something that I apply in a lot of situations. Like there's moments of hostility every year in this industry when you're negotiating high stakes things. And those kinds of simple lessons still apply.
Absolutely. So, going off of that, when did you decide that it was time to leave Intuit and move to Beat the GMAT full time?
So when I was working at Intuit, it was a pretty solid day job, consistently 40 hours a week, wonderfully nice people, great mentorship. A little bit boring for me at the time, though. I'd say that a lot of people who had careers there were like in their 30s and 40s, had young families. I was kind of like in my early 20s and wanted a slightly different pace. So in the evenings and weekends is when I'd spend my time on Beat the GMAT. So I'd spend like 40 hours at the day doing this, and then like 50 hours at night. And on the weekends, just building this project on the side. For 3.5 years, it made very little revenue. It was more of like a passion project. I got obsessed with the idea of like, what does it take to actually build a community that is like super robust, So there's a lot of experimentation, a lot of coding, a lot of user acquisition tests. And then eventually it was getting to the point where I was making the same amount of money on Beat the GMAT as I was from my day job at Intuit. And at that point, I felt prepared to actually leave Intuit to actually focus on Beat the GMAT full time. This is sort of like a side note that you didn't ask, but the person who gave me this break to allow me to go full time on Beat the GMAT is none other than Andrew Yang, the guy who recently ran for president. So at the
Oh,
time,
wow.
he used to be the CEO of a prominent test prep company called Manhattan Prep. And he was the first person to reach out to me, his team, to say like, hey, you're running a really interesting community. Would you ever be interested in some sort of partnership where we can like pay you some money to drive some leads our way? And then from that, the revenue just grew really quickly. It led to other partnerships and so forth. So we've been really good friends ever since. And I'll never forget his early support of Beat the GMAT.
Absolutely. So speaking of Andrew Yang coming in to help, so he almost became a mentor to you, right? Helping you out as a business partner.
No, I wouldn't say that at all. I mean, like
No?
at the end of the day, he was a client. So
Okay.
I was in a position where like I was in his service to actually drive leads his way.
Got it.
That's not to say though we didn't build like a really good friendship through it. So we were buds throughout our entire careers in ed tech. When he started his new organization, Venture for America, I was one of the first donors into this cool organization he was building. When he decided to run for president, I think I was one of the very first people he spoke to outside of his family. I remember this distinctly.
Yeah.
We were holding a birthday party for him. And like I arrived early, we were sort of catching up outside of the restaurant. He told me about this insane plan. And then I basically told him like, I think this is a terrible idea. There's no way you're going to win. But I ended up, I think I was 100% wrong. It was completely worthwhile. He brought so many great issues 10 years into the future. Just talking about UBI, like this notion of like, fair wages and just his vision of America. And I'll say this, which is like, he's a non-BS person. Like what you actually see on TV is actually who he is. He is like so weirdly obsessed with fixing America and motivated to do it. And actually has the gall to think that he can do it himself and inspire others, not himself, but inspire others to like along the vision, sell and tell a really good story. So, I mean, like it's really exciting to see the trajectory of his career, and also exciting too that he was one of the first people I called to when I started Hustle Fund to get his investment dollars into our fund to get going too.
Got it. Wow. So, moving sort of back to a little bit towards the growth of Beat the GMAT, I've read that you and your co-founder, you spent like an absurdly low amount of money to build the company, right? And then it got acquired for a considerably higher amount, right? What do you think helped you keep the costs so low?
It was necessity. I was working in a space where it was impossible to receive venture financing. And only now as a venture capital do I realize how terrible a business investment that would have been for a VC fund, for example. So this is like a little bit of a broader question, but for VC funds, the way that the mathematics works is that you really do need to support founders who are taking a massive swing and trying to get to like $1 billion or more outcome. That's the only way the mathematics will cascade down to return capital back to your investors and get to this kind of profit mode called carry. It's really difficult to do that from like singles and doubles. So an example is like, if I gave you $1 million and then you did well, and then I get $5 million back, that's not going to be enough of an outcome to actually meaningfully start to return capital back to my investors. And we can sort of have a long conversation about why the mathematics are so fraught. So because I was in a space that was so niche, and also the market size of the GMAT and MBA admission space is really small, I estimated it to be about $100 million maximum. There's not many mechanisms to receive any venture financing. So that means that the necessity was to just remain as bootstrapped and as lean as possible. But the lucky thing about that was around 2005, when I started Beat the GMAT, and that's still continuing to happen to the present, the cost of starting and maintaining a company got way cheaper. I mean, there's a period in the 90s where you have to spend $10 million on servers alone. AWS, it's like fractions of a penny per hour or something like that, right? Like all these tools have become free. Open source is better as well. So it was possible to just like essentially put up like a free website on like pretty cheap hosting, and then scale up to like a decent size. And my community was never going to be billions of people. It got to about 3 million people,
Yeah.
and it did start to have problems at that point. We got there with relatively little technical problems because it got so cheap to run these businesses. And then we would
Got
just
it.
use the revenue coming in and invest it into the business.
Cool. So speaking of the acquisition, what was the process of the acquisition? What did it look like?
So around 7 years in, I was starting to get pretty tired. So I was working with my business partner, David. He was kind of like a late co-founder into the business, a remarkably smart guy. And then my wife actually as well was a key member who came in quite early and was handled all the revenue for the business. And we were getting a little bit tired of the small paychecks, and the hours were just insane. Like I couldn't remember a holiday in December that wasn't just an insane amount of work. So, an unsolicited acquisition offer came from another company, and it was large enough in size where we had to take it seriously. And once we received that, we decided like maybe we should actually run a process to see whether we can get similar kinds of term sheets. And that's exactly what we did. We found a investment banker that had focused on a lot of ed tech deals in the past,
Mhm.
worked through that process, and then over the course of about a year was able to triangulate down to a couple of parties, and ultimately found an awesome fit with Hobson's, which is one of the education divisions of the Daily Mail Group.
Yeah.
And what an incredible fit. I can't say enough good things about that team. Such wonderful human beings there. They treated us so well through the process, and afterwards to spend about a year and a half there transitioning Beat the GMAT into Hobson's, and then was ready to leave.
Wow. Okay. So let's fast forward a few years from there, right? Past you're leaving the Daily Mail, and let's go to when you landed at 500 startups, right? So could you describe first what 500 startups is and what your role with them was?
Yeah. So 500 Startups is a somewhat prominent accelerator and fund based in the Bay Area. And so they have a program that's sort of similar to Y Combinator in ingesting cohorts of founders a few times per year. And what I really like about 500 Startups too is a few things. One is they have a pretty good emphasis on teaching distribution and growth to those who are participants in the program. And that's something that inspired us with Hustle Fund as well, or we focus on those similar objectives as well. And in addition to that too, I think that they really nailed it when it became when they decided they're going to be a global fund first, meaning they want to just support founders everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
For a long period of time, it was considered weird to just not invest in businesses that are outside of Silicon Valley, like just only focus on Silicon Valley. There's many funds that operated like this for quite some time. And it was a bit daring for them to go to Southeast Asia, Africa, other Latin America. And some of those investments have fared very well. So I joined as a entrepreneur in residence in that program. Kind of reunited with my longtime friend Elizabeth. We'd been friends and collaborators for quite some time. At the time, she'd been running the accelerator program as the lead partner behind the accelerator, or one of them. And then, she offered me this position because I was thinking about starting another company, and I wanted to buy a little bit of time and could use a little bit of healthcare benefits. And that gave me my early exposure into venture, which I really quickly fell in love with. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of context around 500.
Yeah. So could you tell me a little bit about how specifically you got introduced to venture? What like stood out about the game that made it so fun for you?
Yeah. So at 500 Startups, you bring in a cohort, and then the entrepreneurs and residences in the program, they all come from operating backgrounds for the most part. So, the cohort comes in, you're kind of assigned like 9 or 10 companies to be a designated mentor to. You meet with them on a weekly basis. You sort of talk about their issues, experiments to run around growth. And I love this mentorship capability of it. The second thing that I kind of like realized that made me fall in love with venture is really two things. One was that the founders that I was starting to meet as an investor were way smarter than me. So as I was sort of thinking about like all these sectors that I might want to build a company into, I would meet the founders or a set of founders who are doing similar kinds of solutions in spaces I was
Yeah.
interested in. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, there's no way I can compete with you. Like you're just like so much more talented than I am. So, understanding that, if you could build a portfolio and just like support
Hmm.
these teams who are far more talented than you, um, that's like a really cool way of at least having a small part of the journey, but also like hopefully like, sharing what you are good at and unblocking those
Yeah.
teams along the way so that they can just like see through their vision. And I love that approach of just like building a portfolio of people who are way more talented than you. And then I think the thing that really inspired me, like I guess the second part was, and we think about this a lot with Hustle Fund, is that the bar for etiquette and just the social contract that VCs funds have with founders is totally broken. I mean, for a long time, it's been institutionally this asymmetric power dynamic where it's like, you're pitching me, Arnav, on money, and I'm sort of sitting on the other side of this table. You're begging me for cash essentially, and then I
Yeah.
can treat you like not well. I might not be paying attention to you. I could be a creepy guy. I don't know what it is. And then like, founders never really have an avenue to actually complain about this stuff because, they don't want any retribution either. So it's seriously messed up. But with the new class of emerging managers that are coming, it's not just Hustle Fund. I think we're all taking like a different kind of tact and approach to founders, which is there more of like a services model that we should be approaching, which is like when Arnav says yes to our investment, like what can we do to actually unblock him based on our operating experiences, network,
Yeah.
education programs that we can build for him, something that just feels like he's getting more than just capital from us. And the reason why is I think that capital is rapidly becoming a commodity where like if you can get cash here, you can get cash there. And if it's just cash that you want, then whatever. But the way that you win deals is just by treating people really well. And I think that also comes down to some basic things like kindness, right? Just like being like a good human being to people. So I saw that with Elizabeth and some of our early supporters that, there's sort of like this institutionally broken relationship between VCs and founders. But if we just be more kind and then unblock the teams the most with actual help, not just saying that we're
Yeah.
going to help along with our cash, there could be a winning model there for how our fund develops its brands and how the kinds of founders that we can eventually attract to work with.
Wow. So are those some of the changes that you're mostly trying to implement now at Hustle Fund?
Oh yeah. I mean, I I never really had a great interaction with the VC when I was a founder. I wasn't
Mhm.
really seriously pitching them either, but I just didn't like them. Right.
Yeah.
So, this is the fund that we're trying to create for ourselves. And, the way that we sort of provide value is in a few things. One is like primarily like how we assist teams on their growth. So our model for Hustle Fund is directed under this core thesis that the very best leading indicator of success at very early stage teams that's discernible with early stage teams is this quality that we call hustle. So for us, hustle is defined as great execution meets high velocity. And that's not something that you can really easily pick up in a pitch or by looking at someone's LinkedIn resume, but actually by working with the team for some period of time. So in our model, what we do is we start with a small $25,000 check to start. We can usually do that within one meeting, write that check. We'll
Yep.
then work together on growth projects for some period of time, usually between 4 and 8 weeks. And we have sort of growth schools and so forth that we can put founders in to assist with that as well. And in that course of working together with the teams is when we can get a much better sense of how well they operate, their hustle, learn more about the nuances of the market. But the
Yeah.
founders, more critically, are also judging us to see whether we're actually adding value, actually seem like trustworthy partners that they want to grow old with. And what we find is that when it fits, where we like to hustle on both sides, we think that the market opportunity is really huge. We'll ask to participate in their next financing round with a much larger check between $250,000 to $1 million. And they'll become a core
Yeah.
position in our fund and we'll commit to getting those businesses through their Series A financing. So for us, like what I really love about this is accountability. I can't afford to act like an asshole or be creepy or like behave in the way that past VCs have, because that disqualifies me from founders wanting to have me participate in future rounds. Right. And I think that just like building that kind of natural checks and balances is really healthy
Yeah.
because it just creates incentive for everyone to be nice people.
Got it. So, speaking of your investment thesis, what type of companies, like what industries, are you mostly seeing yourself invest in at Hustle?
Yeah, great. We're a generalist fund, so we'll look at anything that is software enabled. So that gives us a very, very wide mandate of businesses that we can work with. I would say that we veer a little bit more towards B2B business models, like SaaS kind of
Hmm.
businesses. But we do have a fair number of consumer startups. We have a fair number of digital health, women's health, really a fintech, quite a wide range of companies that we've backed.
Got it.
I'd say that the companies that we can't invest in generally are most deep tech. So if you're, doing asteroid mining, could be really awesome, but we just don't have enough capital to support those kinds of projects.
Hmm.
Most hardware is also quite too expensive for us, although we've done it in the past. And a definite no would be like life sciences. Like, we have no
Yeah,
skills to assess like which COVID vaccine is better than the other. We just don't have that kind of science background.
got it. So let's go to the origin story of Hustle Fund. How did you meet your co-founders and decide that it was time to leave 500 startups to start your own venture fund?
Yeah. So I think that it began with a single question, um, which is, so let me start with like how I met my co-founder. So Elizabeth was leading the accelerator program at 500 Startups and was a longtime friend of mine. And we've gelled on other projects before too together. So we knew that we always wanted to work together again. She and our third GP, sort of a later co-founder, is based in Singapore, longtime friend of ours too. We all met our freshman year of college 20 years previously.
Yeah,
Um, she was in the process of potentially thinking, creating a new fund in Southeast Asia, but there's so much values alignment that we just asked to do it together. And fortunately, she agreed. So that's a little bit how we met. But I'd say that with Hustle Fund, it all started really with that single question, which was, why is it that the exact same type of founder is getting most of the seed capital? So I want to sort of define that as like a super narrow pedigree and phenotype. If you're like a whiter Asian man who went to Stanford with a computer science degree, worked at a Google or Facebook, and lives in the Bay Area, is just like this trope of a founder that just seems to have much, much easier access to seed capital than those who do not
yeah,
possess those traits, those outside of the Bay Area, women, and so forth. So that led to like a second question once we asked, like, why are the same dudes getting all the money? Which is it the case that these men that I just described, with these characteristics I just described, are getting most of the capital because they're better founders? As in, like, are men better than women at starting companies? Are white people better than black people in starting companies, etc.? And this led to a lot of research where, me and Elizabeth, in having access to a pretty large portfolio at 500 and a lot of like having mentored so many companies, we're starting to see we're trying to see if there are patterns of like those who fit like a very specific profile consistently going to have like outlier kinds of results in their businesses later
yeah.
on. And the more that we researched this and more data we tried to collect on it, the less we became convinced that you can pattern match something like race and gender and pedigree to an outcome. But what started to emerge was a different heuristic that seemed to correlate very well with success longer term, and that's hustle. So for us,
Okay.
hustle is defined as great execution meets high velocity. And we found that teams that just were shipping a lot of code, running a lot of experiments, driving very hard sales pipeline processes, whatever is the right execution metric for measuring that given team, those teams that ship hard with great quality and great throughput week after week, month after month, year after year, tend to just grind out the best businesses over
Okay.
time. And it turns out that great hustlers look like anyone and come from anywhere. So, we have a really diverse set of founders. We're approaching like 50% women as like companies that make it to those core positions in our fund,
Wow.
27% underrepresented groups. It just looks more and more like the population of the markets that we serve every day because great hustlers look like anyone and come from anywhere.
Wow. Okay. And so earlier in our talk, you mentioned that you invest within like one meeting, right?
Yeah.
And obviously, for a lot of venture firms, that's very unusual. So could you walk me through what allows you to like pull the trigger on an investment so fast?
Absolutely. So I think the method by which we invest is also kind of weird. So I usually insist, if at all possible, and almost always, to do these meetings on the phone. So
Okay.
if one thing that you just got to start from is recognizing that I, Eric Bahn, co-founder of Hustle Fund, am also a racist and a sexist. And what I mean by that is like, I don't hate like people who like of certain groups. It's more just like, I grew up in a really privileged part of Michigan. I went to a really privileged rich kids school called Stanford. I worked at other rich kids places like Facebook and Instagram. And therefore my worldview is being surrounded by highly, highly privileged, for the most part, people, right? Which does pollute my own view of the world, because like it is such a narrow vision of the world that's so frightening to me that like maybe my own biases, I know this for a fact, is actually preventing me from seeing other bigger opportunities because of my own biases, right? So I work with a therapist and then trying to like, overcome that, but I assume that I never will, because so what we do instead is this isn't perfect, but one initial checks and balance is to do this on the phone. So when I'm talking to someone, a founder, on their first pitch, at least I can focus more on the ideas and I'm not distracted by how they look. Now, it's not perfect because I can generally discern gender, in most cases, but it's more about the ideas being fed into my ear. And I just feel like I can listen so much better. And if I get like 60% convinced that the ideas being presented are interesting enough where I'm curious to actually move on to the next stage, which is to run a growth project with them. That's actually all the requirements that are needed to write an investment. So we test for, like, in the interview, I want to hear things about like your team, problem, solution, market, and traction. Those are really my 5 pillars: team, problem, solution, market, and traction. And just understanding how thoughtful the founders are in answering some of these things to make the case for their business. In addition to that, our fund is a little bit weird because any general partner on our team, as I mentioned, is able to write a check of $25,000 into any company without consulting the other. And it's designed because we want to invite contrarian but right views. We find that actually our most exciting companies generally do not have any consensus at all. It's like Arnav saying like, this is amazing, like we have to do this. And then co-founder Eric saying like, this is crazy, why would you do this? And in the course of actually working with a team is when we see the truth. And often that's when like the most surprising results will happen. So we want that contrarian views. When we decide to write a much larger check though, 250,000 or more, that's when all 3 general partners need to speak to the founder and have consensus that we want to support this founder in her journey to the next stages. And the reason why is because of how we're compensated. So we have an equal salary, equal carry model, which means we all make the same amount of money day to day, but we all also share the rewards in the same way when this thing hits like huge profit. So there's no such thing as like an Elizabeth company or an Eric company. It's all the same. And then since our general partnerships to all want to work with the founder versus like, oh, that's like an Elizabeth thing. So we think that this is actually a really key part of our model for why Hustle Fund's kind of unique among a lot of funds.
Cool. So talking about the stage at which people are pitching you, I know you're a pre-seed to seed type of fund, right? So when people are coming to you, are they coming to you with an idea? Are they coming to you with a product, with sales? What is the stage that companies are at?
So for us pre-seed, like we love being part of like the round. There were a lot of family members and angels are participating. We will do some idea stage businesses if it's like someone that we know or respect really, really well. So if it's like my friend that I worked with for like years, and I know that she's like capable of, producing great products and distribution, then yeah, we'll on occasion like do an idea stage investment there. But in most cases, we will not. So we want to see teams that have at least shipped some early product and have maybe a little bit of early traction. The product can be pretty terrible. It could be just like an early prototype. And the traction can be really light. Maybe it's just like a pilot. And at that stage, that's when it feels like we've seen enough, like a seriousness behind, the founder's intent to actually proceed forward and try to turn this into a real business where you can feel comfortable to invest.
Got it. So along those lines, is there any one like meeting with an entrepreneur or a pitch that is like always stood out to you as like, this is what all entrepreneurs should look like, or not like physically look like, but like this is what their ideation should be like. This is the way I want people to act around me or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like there's so many people in our portfolio that sort of behave this way. I would say that let me sort of provide like a persona that just always gets me excited. And it's actually derived and actually summarized really nicely by a tweet that Justin Can wrote like a year ago or something. He's a co-founder of Twitch. Yeah. So he said, first time founders focus on product. Second time founders focus on distribution. And why I think this is a really important insight is that you do find this correlation quite a bit, which is like for younger founders, they talk about like how neat the technology is, how beautiful the design and product is. And I'm not saying that isn't important. That's actually really great that you can build excellent product. But what's an excellent product when no one's using it? It's a useless product, right? So distribution is like how well do I know how, or like what is my strategy and what is my executional skill in scaling this business or scaling this application to lots and lots of people. And I get much more excited about founders who are oriented towards distribution and scale. In fact, so much so that I'm cool investing in a company that has possibly inferior technology to someone else in the market if their sales and execution skill is amazing, right? Because at the end of the day, our fund wants to back businesses that are going concerns. For me, a going concern is like a 5-year-old's definition of a business. More money comes in than leaves, right? And I got to see a path to like a very simple business model there.
Yeah.
And everything else is just like a science project. If you have no business model, but it's a cool product, but it's never going to monetize, it's sort of like a science project, and we're not really interested in funding those.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So you do think like besides product, besides idea, the most important factor is like how fast can this person drive growth? How invested are they in like driving the fast growth of the company?
Yeah, I'll give you an example of this. I won't name this founder, but this is a guy who comes from the sales enablement space. He kind of like was building this rating system to qualify leads in your sales funnels. It doesn't sound super sexy, but it's a really important problem if you do it well. And his strategy was just like, I'm going to go and sell like 5 contracts right now for 100,000 a piece. Okay. Right. And, I'll explain what the product does. I'll show them my track record that I can build it, but I'm just going to pre-sell it now because I think there's real need. And he did it. Right. And that's actually like the way that you do this, right? Is just like, he decided to sell before he built and validated in the course of doing that there's actual product market fit potential here because someone's actually giving him money. So when I hear those kinds of scrappy stories of people who just had the gall to, sell products to customers before they go live and, use that as a mechanism to validate the opportunity, I get so excited about those kinds of founders because I think they're going to be scrappy enough to work out a real business over time.
Wow. Okay. So now looking towards present day, current circumstances, how do you think COVID has changed like the larger venture capital industry? Is venture capital still a commodity or is raising money different? What does it look like?
Well, I would say that, there's like this concept that you might learn in high school in an economics class, maybe even saw it, which is like one of the things that really I took away from my economics class, which is this notion of creative destruction, right? There are these periods of time where the economy makes such a substantial shift that some jobs of the old economy will just shed and go away and never come back. But in the process of doing this, brand new jobs will be created in its stead that like reflect the realities of the new economy. And when I think about COVID, I think that it is actually one of the accelerants in this new creative destruction that's happening. And let me start, and it may not, I'm not quite sure where to define it, but I'll just give you an example of this. So creator economy stuff, like the idea that you can like build creative content, art, become an influencer. Those are ideas from the last 10 years. I mean, like Instagram has been working on this quite a bit, but in COVID, when everyone was losing their jobs and going remote and Gen Z basically being saddled by debt and having a hard time finding decent paying jobs, I think they've taken like the creative economy, the creator economy pretty seriously and just like getting much more amazing when it comes to podcasts or, becoming a YouTube influencer or getting a Substack following that has real subscribers, or in some cases, like going to OnlyFans and like building like their adult fan base there. Right. It's just like, there's so many avenues for building where, yourself as just a brand, like the individual as a brand is actually starting to become the individual as like a real business. Right. So I am really excited about that. Maybe this could be we're moving from the information age into the creator age where like all sorts of like micro entrepreneurship is going to be done. So the amazing thing about COVID is that, I think that it really just accelerates this trend. You're at home mostly with more time to create things like a podcast or, do
Yeah.
your art and gather some fans on Patreon. So, and everyone on your audience is largely at home too, being able to just ready to consume this stuff. That's one thing that's really exciting. But I think that from a macro perspective, what gets me excited about the world after COVID is that I think we're just going to remain remote forever.
Hmm.
Now, maybe I'll pull back that comment. I want to go to an office at some point and see my colleagues, because I like them, right? And I do think that in-person hangouts just have a really necessary part of humanity,
Yeah.
right? But for our fund, we're thinking like one day a week we do something like that. We'll just meet up in like some sort of like temporary space, hang out, enjoy each other, get a nice long lunch, and then go away for the rest of the week doing our work. In this case, I'm going to spend probably the rest of my career in my garage, right?
Yeah.
So, um, but Silicon Valley used to be like this notion of like a geography where you have to come to the Bay Area to build, and a lot of VCs are pushing that kind of expectation. But now that everyone's kind of spreading out, a lot of people are permanently leaving. Silicon Valley is more of like a state of mind, and the information and like knowledge of Silicon Valley is really becoming more democratized around the world. So I think for VCs is on us to make sure that our funds adapt to accommodate making decisions on Zoom, being able to support teams online, being able to support teams that you'll never meet in your entire career, in fact, in
Yeah.
person, but can have a deep and rich and awesome experience in collaborating with them just in like this kind of a format on Zoom and other mechanisms. I get super excited about that because I think that just makes more founders come online when they can be supported regardless of where they are on the earth.
Yeah. So speaking of how Hustle Fund has adapted, has the number or type of companies that have approached you or if you've talked with, has that changed?
Yeah. So in terms of like our fund operations, we've been remote first since 2017. As soon as
Oh,
we
well.
got Sheehan, our third GP online, she lives in Singapore. So the only way we
Okay.
can talk was Zoom since the inception of the fund. We also were always fine with writing deals on Zoom or on the phone. Like that was not unusual to us. At the time when we got started, it was considered quite controversial, like, whoa, you're not actually like meeting these people in person to make sure they're crazy. And I think largely like the world has caught up in VC. Like founders, for example, have been doing remote teams for like decades. And like,
Yeah.
they're like, yeah, I mean, this is just what life is like. But VCs, I think, finally have caught up. Um, yeah, so I think remaining remote is gonna be long. And sorry, can you repeat the second part of that question? I think I'm missing it right now. I'm not hitting it.
It's really just has the number or type of companies that
Oh, right.
you've worked
Yes.
with changed?
Thank you. So there's been an insane amount of volume of
Okay.
interest for, in terms of like the number of deals that we're seeing. We see about 500 companies per month, and we'll invest in
Wow.
about 5 businesses per month, so about 1%. So largely those who have kind of been predisposed towards entrepreneurship, I think, in this environment have accelerated their ability to, or their goals of actually becoming a founder. And we're talking to so many folks. And I think at a zeitgeist level, when I think about like society and the economy, a lot of people probably share a view to some degree that this creative destruction is happening, that the world is going to be different. And whoever is going to be building the tools now during this period of crisis may actually become like the new Facebook or like the new Salesforce
Yeah.
or whatever new tool is necessary to accommodate the world that happens after COVID. So I feel remarkably blessed to be like young enough with enough like capital at disposal to actually be a participant in this kind of this new wave. I just think that these kinds of things happen once every 20 years.
Wow. Got it. So now let's just look at the macro of everything you've learned, everything you've gone through, right? So what is something that, when you were first starting out with like your first company or your time at Hustle Fund or any other experience that you've had along the way, right? What is one thing that you wish you had known at the start of the journey?
Um, that's really easy to answer. So I think if I look back in my entire founder career, look at the things that worked out really well, that didn't, Hustle Fund even now, it comes down to just like one thing that I kind of knew, but now actually I 1000% accept, and is now turns into my advice, which is you got to marry well.
Okay.
I mean, so the most important partner in my life is my wife, right? I mean, like we have two wonderful kids. We have this home. She's a founder herself, an incredibly talented founder. And because we share such good values and really understand how to support each other and are complementary in our skills, she allows me to keep challenging myself, supporting me during these crazy ideas of like starting all these businesses. And actually, more than that, in the case of my wife, she always challenges me to think like 100x bigger. Like I think I actually
Yeah.
naturally think fairly small in terms of success, but she's always the one shaking me, thinking like you got to think bigger. And the fact that I was able to marry well is actually like the connective tissue of everything in my career, right? And I actually have everything in my life that like I feel so safe at home with such a great partner who's my best friend. And then it allows me to unlock so much abundance mentality and risk into building out this venture capital firm, other projects in the future too. So not neglecting just like who your life partner is, I think is a key thing. um, and yeah, I guess like sort of related to that too is, when I proposed to my wife, I think the key question I asked her was, do you want to grow old with me? And that's actually a critical question to ask your co-founders as well. If they don't share really good values alignment with you, then there's a really high chance of co-founder breakup. It can be quite painful and annoying. Everyone loses money. But if you find partners like I found, like Elizabeth and Sheehan and all the other 12 members of the Hustle Fund team, where I'm just like, I really want to settle in and do this for a long time with these people. It just brings so much more joy to the work. And then as a result, we all do way better work than we could otherwise
Got it.
imagine. So you got to love your people.
Yeah, got it. So speaking of these learning lessons, this is just like a brief thought experiment, right? But if you were like, let's say you were a teenager again, right, during these crazy times, during COVID and everything's going on, what would you build or like how would you make money?
So there's a saying that I think about a lot, which is small hinges swing wide doors,
Mhm.
right? And to me, that's actually a lesson of compound interest. So if you start to develop really good habits young, it's going to lead into huge compound effects later. A very simple example of this would be like start investing, right? So if you put in like $100 a month into your Vanguard investing fund or something, your index fund, and just ignore like the Robinhood stuff into crypto, just like $100 now, and you just consistently make the case of just contributing to your Vanguard index fund and maybe increasing as you make a little bit more money, then you're guaranteed to become a millionaire in like a reasonable period of time, probably by like your 40s even, just because of
Yeah.
compound interest is so powerful. So one of the things I really admire, Arnav, about your initiative is like as a sophomore, having a medium like this, which makes it very easy for people more established in their careers to engage with you, to form a relationship. It's really amazing. And like things like podcasts and interviews actually allow you to punch above your weight, right? Because I'm
Yeah.
sure like the response rate of someone who wants to come on your podcast is far higher than someone who's just going to give you in like 15 minutes on like a Zoom coffee one-on-one. That's
Oh,
just sort of like
absolutely.
how, yeah, it's probably something that you've seen your experience with. And you mentioned some of the great guests you've had previously to me on email. So for me, it's less about making money now, but it's more about making money, a lot of money later. And what I
Got it.
wish I could have done earlier in my career is exactly what you did, which is have a mechanism to reach out to people who are successful in different areas of career that I might be interested in participating in the future. You don't have to define specifically what it is, just like a good like diversity of folks who are successful and interesting, and then invest in some sort of mechanism to keep them up to date about your life. So one of the best things I did in my 20s was start an annual holiday newsletter where all the interesting people that I met in the year, I'll just dump them into this newsletter list and I'll send them one message a year, just giving them
Yeah.
update about like what happened in my life, my latest contact information, let me know what's going on in your life. And it allows me to maintain contact with thousands and thousands of people every year this way and just remind them that I exist and I can help them too. In your case, like if you can get started 10, 15 years earlier than I did, I can only imagine how big that list will be when you're 39. Like you might
Yeah.
actually have like a newsletter list of like 20,000 people. And it turns out that these people will grow old with you too. And someone who's like a director of product now becomes like the CEO of like a Fortune 500 company like over years, right? And then that is actually how you'll eventually make a lot of money. If you decide to start a fund, you have like 20,000 friends you can talk to first. If you decide that you want to have a job, you no longer actually have to interview. You just reach out to one of your buddies and then just say, I want a job at your company. And then your buddy will say like, great, I'll just make a role for you. Right. So that's sort of like the habit that I challenge you to consider keeping up. And I swear it works. This is like the number one thing I would change if I can go back in time, is just like find a mechanism to continually meeting people successful in their careers and maintaining contact on sim cadence.
Absolutely. I will definitely do that.
Good.
Yeah. So as we come to the end of our hour, my final question is just for some laughs, right? So I've read everywhere that there's some mention of your name, that you're obsessed with minivans.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
So could you tell me about that obsession? Where did it start? Where did it, like how it affects you? Like why you care so much about minivans?
Thanks. I think this is the first time anyone's asked me this question in an interview, and I've done a lot of these things. So actually, does your family own a minivan?
We used to, not anymore. Now we have an SUV.
Oh, okay. So yeah, because you got older, right?
Yeah.
Well, you'll remember that the minivan doors kind of like slide open, right? So like to me, actually, that's like straight up magic first and foremost, because like when you're carrying like a small child and a bag and all that stuff, and then the door basically is creating no profile and opening, it's like I still can't get over like how amazing that just like that design innovation is. But when it comes to minivans, I think it comes down to a few things that actually I sort of thought about this quite a bit, because I do absolutely love minivans. I think they're the finest vehicles that people should buy per dollar spent. I mean, maybe an EV truck is better or something like that. But like, it's that society has decided that it's nerdy and dumb to have a minivan, or like selling out, or old people do this. But it is for whatever reason, like society's script that they're trying to impose on you as an individual. So if you just stop caring about that and can look at a minivan really objectively, you'll realize that they're mostly fuel efficient, because minivans usually have weaker engines, highly practical with the sliding doors and cargo space. And just like new modern day minivans are just delightful vehicles. Like in the 90s, when we had a minivan as a kid, they were like real crappy cars, but now they feel like really good driving devices. And because they're so nerdy, prices tend to be a little bit more depressed given their value, because, there's less demand versus like an SUV. So for me, this is just like a manifestation of a few things. It's just like, I love the practicality of it. I love fighting back on society's stereotype that like, I can be a good person or like a cool person and drive a minivan or not drive a minivan. I just don't care about that kind of stuff. And and also the third is just like, it's kind of like a litmus test. It's just like, minivan people tend to be correlated with having families and like young kids. And I'm sure just in the phase of my life where I just like talking about that stuff, because I got my own young kids and families. And it's a nice way to bond with people. Like when you sort of talk about, how are you running your household? Why'd you pick that minivan and so forth? So that's really the thinking behind it.
Awesome. That's really cool.
Sure. Yeah.
Cool. So I think that brings us to like a nice close for the filming. So thank you so much again for coming on the podcast. It was great talking to you. Really enjoyed it. Hope you did as well.
Yeah, I did, Arnav. Like, thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you, especially in this like first season that you're putting together. And I really do think that, you're quite an impressive interviewer. The founder grit to like put this together from scratch when you're already busy with school and other obligations. It's like really remarkable. So congratulations to you. I can't wait to see where you go with this. And, hopefully you'll decide to become a founder or investor one day. We can have a chat about that.
Absolutely. And there we have it, my interview with Eric Bahn. If you enjoyed this podcast episode, make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you're watching it, and make sure to go check out our other episodes that have already been published.